This video documents part 2 of the BCS Certificate in Computer Science Teaching, which is a programming project. For this programming project, I decided to create or to solve one of the OCR sample NEAs, so an NEA that is not live, and it's task 1. The reason why I decided to do this was I wanted to essentially solve a task with very high level skills that I'd want students at the top end of GCSE and maybe going into year 12 to be able to look at and learn from. I also wanted to look at some simple GUIs. So in the past I looked at tkinter and also PyQt, and I want to investigate whether we could use something else, such as let's say easygui or app-jar, for example. And in the end I settled on easygui. This is essentially the easygui, and it was something that I came across when I did the pilot for a research project at King's College London, run by Dr. Sue Sentence, and the project was about programming pedagogy, and it's called PRIM, which is predict, run, implement, modify, and make. The whole project is about how to teach programming and essentially exploring different tools that we can use and different techniques in Python, and easygui was one of them. So I thought I'd run with that because it's not event driven. I think it can be accessible at Key Stage 4, maybe even Key Stage 3. So let's have a look at the working system, then I'll talk you through the code behind it. So you see you have input boxes and a password input box. Essentially the system does solve all of the parts of this OCR sample NEA. It probably goes a bit beyond it as well. So say for example, if we do scroll down past this, what we have is apologies for the jumping, so we have a login system, which we just saw, a menu system here, the ability to enter and store new student details, the ability to log out, to retrieve student details, and then 3 reports. So for example, teachers might want to call home for students in their form. They might want to take a register and display the register, and they may also want to just check up on students who are absent or ill. So those are the 3 reports. But let's go ahead and have a look at entering new details. You'll see the form is really user-friendly. So let's say, for example, we enter in the student's details, and you'll also notice that there's validation on here. So if we enter something spurious here, and let's just finish this. So 1 New Street, Tree Town for Tree Road School, and T1 for okay. Let's just enter an incorrect phone number, and for gender we'll enter something incorrect as well, and we'll put in a form. You'll notice that the validation tells us what we need to correct. So for example, date of birth is invalid. Now it says that phone number is invalid. I could probably add a full stop here to the error message. We'll go ahead and do that in a moment. So let's say for example the phone number must follow a UK mobile or landline. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 11, and then female. Okay. So what I've also done is I've generated a unique ID based on the user's name, and also a unique email address based on that name as well. In the OCR task, that's not required. It says a unique ID is already given to students, but I thought that by generating it, we'd be teaching students about things like string slicing and generating, well, checking if an ID already exists, and essentially adding in extra characters to make an ID unique. After this, it gives you a message saying, do you want to log out or return to the main menu? We can return to the main menu. We can retrieve student details. So if we look at, say, let's just look at JA-BR8503, so that's a unique ID. And it comes up with James Brown. It gives them the form, date of birth. And this is a really neat way to output student details using easygui. Also, what it has is it has things like a contact home list. And at this point, it got a bit tricky because here you can see that we're using tkinter. I did try to do this in easygui, but there's no way of generating a large amount of text output in easygui. It's just not designed for that. But interestingly, you can actually mix and match, and it's quite unconventional. But even after that, I can still go back to the main menu, take today's register. So if I want to register this form 10S, it'll just say, are they absent or present? So present, absent, present, absent, present. And this was the user that we just made, present. What that will do is it'll generate the report, and it'll also give us an attendance percentage as well, which is quite useful. Let's return to the main menu. Absent or ill list is similar. So let's say we want to check all the people who were absent in 10S. It'll just bring up a list of all those that were absent and their phone number, so the teacher can phone home. And a log out takes us back to this screen. We can log back in, or we can exit, and that'll just close the program down. So let's have a look at the initial code that I wrote before we actually went to the GUI, because that's probably most important. You'll notice that I started off with a main loop, and it simply asks for a username, and that username is passed as a parameter to a login procedure. Initially, we create a blank list. Position 0 is for the username, position 1 is for the password, and we essentially say that the username, well, we created another temporary variable called username2, becomes the username that's been passed in. We then open this text file, users.txt. I added in other things as well, so for example, their role at the end, but essentially it has username, password, first name, last name, and thanks, waking up in 9 hours, and also their role. So essentially it checks each of these positions, as you can see here. So for example, it checks is position, it opens a file, runs through the username which we've passed in, and it checks if it's in the line. If it is in the line, then we load that entire line, and that line becomes checklist. It says, okay, checklist 0. If checklist 0 is blank, then the username must be incorrect. Yeah, because if it hasn't replaced the current checklist, then essentially it wasn't found, and it loops back to main. So it goes back and says, incorrect username. It then asks for the password, and it checks position 1. Is the password equal to the password which they entered in the login procedure? And if it is, then we get to the main menu. Otherwise, we get to the login procedure. The main menu, what I did here is I outputted a load of choices, and so say for example, just using a print A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the things that we need to do. I realized that we could use .lower and essentially casting everything to lowercase, but we should also have a list of possible answers, because some people might put A, some people might actually write in enter and store student details, some people might write the entire line. So I've just said, look, if what they've written is in that list, great, then we can we can run the relevant procedure. So enter student details is the first one, and you'll see that here. We're asking for first name, surname, all the details. Notice that when I went on a training course with Dr. Sarah Shakibi, it was actually a CAS event, and she essentially said that when you're asked for, say, home address, that's a composite field, and you want actually to find out, well, you want atomic fields. So say, for example, you need to break that down into address 1, address 2, postcode. So that was really useful. Phone number, when we're reading in phone number, that's actually validated using phone function here. Now, at this point, I realize that in the actual NEA, students won't have access to the internet. And so but I thought it'd be really important for at least A-level students and even GCSE students to know about how regular expressions work, and the fact that you can take a pattern and these patterns are already given in the regular expressions library, so there's no point in them trying to come up with a UK phone number, because, you know, Amos Heard has already written one, and likewise for a mobile number. So I've essentially taken those, I referenced it here and said, look, if the phone number that's entered in matches either a UK phone number or a UK mobile, then we can return it. Otherwise, we can ask them to enter a valid phone number, and this is essentially a recursive call. It calls itself and asks them for another phone number. Other things that we do, gender is also validated, but I thought I'd validate that in a different way. Just checking if they enter M or F. If they do, then once again we return the gender. Otherwise, another recursive call, it calls gender function again. Tutor group is fine. We're just asking them for their tutor group, and then I'm generating their initial unique ID by slicing the first 2 characters of their surname, first 2 characters of their surname, and then elements 2 to 4, which is the year of their date of birth, and 5 to 7, which is a month for the date of birth. Date of birth itself has been validated using, I'm just gonna, what is this? Okay, that's fine. I think it's because I'm screen recording on an old computer, so I keep getting performance enhancement prompts. So with the date of birth, I'm validating that using the datetime module, so checking that it does fit the format DDMMYY. When it's actually stored, it's stored in a different format. And that's why the string slicing is a bit strange there. There's elements 2 to 4 for the year, because the year is stored first, and then month and day. Unique ID, so I've generated that using a function. So with the unique ID, you'll see that I essentially pass in a unique ID based on the slicing. I check to see if it already exists. So in here we've got a student's file. Check to see if it already exists, and if it does, then what we do is we add a hash. If that already exists, it would keep adding hashes effectively. So here it just says user out equals user in plus hash. Check it again. If it's still in there, add another hash. And that will essentially ensure that there's no duplicate IDs. All of the student details are then appended to a list. Well, actually, it's converted to a string first, and then it's written to a file, but that string is in the format of a list. I'll explain why that is in a moment. I check to see if the file already exists, students.txt. If it doesn't, we're going to make a new file. Otherwise, we can append it here using the append mode, and we're going to write in this string here. You'll see, like I said, we used a list format. Now we could also use a 2D list and append to a 2D list, but I thought it's best to keep things simple. So rather than having to read in the 2D list, append it, and then write it back to the file, I thought it'd be much easier just to open a text file and each time on a new line append in a list. And that way when we're searching for a user detail, we're just searching, check if the username's in the line. If it is, we can evaluate the entire line as a list. After that, so that would be entering student details. There's also a function to retrieve student details as well, which I call here if they enter B. I think, yeah, here I've set a Boolean flag because if we're trying to find a user's details, then we need some kind of flag which tells us whether or not it's been found. We enter the unique ID, we open the text file, and for each line we check if the unique ID is in the line. If it is in the line, we're going to check if it's an exact match. If it is, that is true, we break from the loop, and then we can just output the details for that user. If it's not found, so if the binary flag is still false, then we can just say the user details can't be found. Maybe they need to check the unique ID, and we call the procedure that we're in. So it starts again. The reports. Now the reports pose some difficulty because what I notice, so if you run this version, which is the original just text-based version, you'll see we enter our username, we enter our password. It's obviously just a dummy password for quick data entry, and we output the report. You notice that, I mean, to start with, it was really difficult to format this into columns. So what I had to do was add some padding, and the way that I did that was I looked at the length of each user's details, and then subtracted from that the maximum length of that column. So username, for example, was 8, added 2 more spaces, 9, 10. It's unlikely that they're going to have more than 10 characters in the username because of how we've sliced 8 characters. So that accommodates having 3 duplicate names in the school, and likewise here you've got first name and surname, and the padding is calculated once again as the difference between the student's name and the maximum length for that field, and you'll see that that's how we output it in these neat columns. If you have a look at, say, report 2, so say for example today's register, was the text-based version, we're literally just putting in present or absent, and then it would tell you that the file's been written, it'd output the register, output the percentage, and we probably need to format this to 1 decimal place. Report 2 is quite simple in the sense that how it outputs the one that you just saw is we enter the form, it will go through the student's file, and it will load only the line where the form is, say for example 10S. It will produce the first name, surname, date of birth, and then are they present? So that would be / absent n, ill, I. That would be appended to a list, and then from that list, which is called register, we would then write that to a file. So in this case, we are actually creating a 2D list. I thought that would be neat to show the students how to create a 2D list. So we have a list, we append to it, and therefore we've got a 2D list. When we're outputting the list, what we're doing here is we output the column headers. Once again, I've calculated the padding here, and then I've got this for loop which goes throughout the whole of the 2D list, and for each initial element we output count. So for example, 02 would be the first name, 03 would be the surname, and then we've got date of birth as well, along with all the padding. I've also said that if the registration mark, so at position 11, if it's a / then we can say the present, and then we can calculate the attendance percentage as well. For report 3, what we're doing here is we are just outputting those with an N or an I. So in all honesty, it's quite similar to report 2. The only difference is that you're opening a file based on the form that's been entered. So let's say they open 10s, because the file names for the register are stored in the format of form and today's date. If you want to find out who's absent and you put in the form, then it actually passes in the form today's date.txt. So it opens the correct text file and it only finds those in the 2D array who have an N or an I marked against them. So those are the 3 reports. If I now jump back to the GUI version, then I suppose to go through this, we've got all our libraries that we've imported at the top, including regular expressions and time. But what you'll see is that most of the things that are done using easygui. It's a lot simpler in the sense that than, say, for example, tkinter, because you don't have to worry about things like packing and the overall layout. The layout is done automatically for you. So if you actually look at the comparison, if you want to just have an input box, you just literally put enter box, a username equals enter box, and you can pass that into the login procedure. You'll see that the main things are that anywhere where we had a print statement, that now becomes a message box. The message box function, or the message box method, essentially takes 2 arguments. One is the message, and the second bit is the title of the window. So when we run this, you'll see that here, that's the title of the window, login to Tree Road School Choose System, and that's the message. I mean, this is actually an enter box. And password box, that's quite useful because obviously it stops people seeing what your password is when you type it, and that's like one benefit. And it's so simple to use, I think it could even be used at Key Stage 3. Now the area where I got into a bit of, I suppose unexpected difficulty was when I generated the first report. So most of the things were quite straightforward in terms of when we're entering student details. They have this neat kind of multiple enter box, and that's what enabled us to enter multiple values here. But when we got onto outputting a large amount of data, outputting a small amount of data was fine. We could output that through a message box and just pass in this really long and quite ugly string, and that would output fine. And you'll see that here. That's fine. However, when you want to output a large amount of text and that's wider than the width of this window, I came across difficulties, and that is when I had to switch across to tkinter. So in tkinter, the reason why I wanted to avoid it to start with was because of the fact you have to create things like, essentially you have to have a root widget, and then you have to set out the size of your window. Obviously easygui does that automatically for you, but here we've said, the size of the window is going to be 25 lines tall, assuming 25 members of a form, 150 characters wide. On the right side, you've got your scroll bar, left side you've got your text, and then text, well, T is an object based on the text method. We're inserting at the end points, that's at essentially that's the start, the first time it runs. We're inserting the user headings, which are these: username, first name, exactly the same as we did in the previous program. And then we're still using the same code, so we're reading in the text file, evaluating the line, and then we're inserting those user details line by line. And then when we want to block it, when we want to essentially break out the loop, you've got main loop there as well. So that starts and stops the event loop. But yeah, it was slightly trickier. The formatting, you have to use plus to concatenate, and these need to be converted into a string, because I think in some cases it actually gave a tuple, but we just converted it as a string and wrote that in. Report 2 likewise was a little tricky. I suppose what I really liked about it was that when you wanted to enter, register students, you can actually set what the buttons were. So the first button is present, second button is absent, third button is ill. So you'll see that here when we take the register. That's really cool because it means that you can take the register just by clicking and you don't need the keyboard at all. And we're outputting the person's name and also their date of birth. We added in the date of birth just in case you had two students with the same name, as you see there. And then you'll see that it outputs the register and also the date of birth there. Let us just round that now whilst we are here. Where are we? I'm converting that to a string, so I'm going to round that first. So let's round this to 1 decimal place. Okay, and let's try that now. So obviously I don't really need it to 10 decimal places. Present, 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 absent, present, present. Yeah, that's much better. Another thing that we said we were going to correct was the error messages that you get when you break the validation rule here. So say for example, error message equals date of birth is invalid. I think what we should do there is maybe \n. Yeah. Phone number is invalid. Gender is invalid. And that will give us some better formatting. So let's say for example we do this and I press OK, then we'll see that, on that rare instance where you've got all of these things, then I think that's still better than it was where it was all just concatenated next to each other. Okay. Onto report 3. We're jumping around a bit, but onto report 3. Essentially, we've got an enter box asking for the form. We're able to insert essentially text at each of these points, and we can use line breaks to separate them out. We're essentially here checking only the students who are marked as code N or code I for absent or ill, and also outputting their phone number as well, so that the parent can call home. So hopefully that's kind of illustrated how this program's been built. I have commented the code, and I'll post up links to the code so that you can look at it in more detail. It's quite a whistle-stop tour, it's 384 lines, but hopefully it demonstrates that the program does work. I'd say that the only drawback with easygui is that easygui doesn't come pre-packaged with Python, the Python distribution, where tkinter does. So it does need installing on your network. It can be done using, I think you can do it using pip. If not, there's an installer on the website. And yeah, I think a few things which were really helpful were the actual official easygui documentation. I did also have a look at how the text widget worked in tkinter, as it's been quite a while since I've used tkinter. And I suppose that might be unrealistic for students doing NEA, but definitely for Key Stage 5, I would encourage research and documenting the research that they do. And you'll notice I'm not, searching Stack Overflow for exact solutions. I'm just looking at how we might be able to, say for example, input a, I don't know, let's say a multiple entry box as such, and we're looking at the field values and we're modifying that for each module. I hope that's been useful, and to students considering using a GUI, and that's it.